Good morning. Our top headline today, the Inflation Reduction Act just passed the Senate after painstaking negotiations. Find out what's in the final version.
Authorities suspect recent killings in New Mexico are connected. A Muslim man was found dead in a parking lot Friday with a gunshot wound. Two men who attended the same mosque were ambushed and killed over the last 2 weeks.
Israel and Palestinian militants declare a ceasefire. It follows 3 days of heavy fighting, which killed dozens and wounded hundreds.
China says it's extending its threatening military exercises in the waters of Taiwan for the next month. That in response to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit.
New Orleans college students reimagining recycling, tackling 2 local environmental issues, and creating jobs in the community.
Good morning. Welcome to NTD. I'm Kevin Hogan.
Good morning, and I'm Evelyn Lee. Happy Monday. It's the 8th of August, and we're starting into the week with something that made major headlines yesterday. After a marathon overnight session, the U.S. Senate passed the sweeping $430 billion Inflation Reduction Act. The bill was proposed last week by Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Senator Joe Manchin. All 50 Democrats voted yes, and all 50 Republicans voted no. The bill passed with Vice President Kamala Harris also voting in favor, breaking the tie on Saturday. Now the legislation will head to the House next and is expected to return on Friday. We're bringing in Melina Weisskopf, our Washington, D.C. correspondent, live this morning. Melina, if you could just quickly recap what's in this package, or asked differently, did anything change in it from the original deal struck by Senators Manchin and Schumer?
Yes, good morning, Evelyn and Kevin. So pretty much like you mentioned, this just was introduced last week, so very little changes have been made to it. There wasn't much time to make changes, even if they wanted to make changes. So a couple of small things that have changed. The carried interest loophole was stripped out. That was something that Senator Sinema wanted stripped out. It's essentially a way that companies get away with paying less in taxes, but they left that open there. And the excise tax, 1% excise tax, has now been added instead. Also, one big thing in the healthcare arena, so the insulin cap that Democrats were trying to expand to all Americans, they wanted to cap the price of insulin at $35. That was stripped from the bill, so now it's still just limited to Medicare recipients. But other than that, the meat of the package is still the same. We still see $370 billion for climate change, which is the biggest climate investment in U.S. history. There's also still $80 billion for the IRS to crack down more on taxpayers, and it also expands the government to allow Medicare to negotiate some drug prices, capping the price of prescription drugs at $2,000. Now, whether it will actually lower inflation, as the name suggests, this is something that I spoke with economists a lot about last week, and many of them, even the ones who are more, they're not as conservative economists, they would say that it would still take at least 10 years for it to lower any inflation at all, and that's because they need to first rake in the revenue in order to lower the deficit, in order for it to lower inflation. But of course, Democrats are touting this as a big win, especially with the election right around the corner. Republicans are not happy about it. So let's listen to what they were saying shortly after that bill passed.
So as we move towards the fall elections, the sharp contrast that was provided today on the floor of the Senate is going to be part of how we frame our case to the American people, why they might want to support Democrats in the elections this fall.
Such a major piece of legislation with only 50 votes, an intransigent Republican minority, a caucus running from Bernie Sanders to Joe Manchin. Wow.
It's an article of faith with Democrats that when they have power, they're gonna raise taxes, they're gonna spend money, and they're gonna grow government. I mean, that's what they do.
Wow, 10 years, that's certainly a long time. So, it's passed now in the Senate. What's next?
Yeah, so I mean, of course, Republicans, we're going to hear a lot from Republicans pushing back against this. They're arguing that the manufacturers will be hurt the most by this, paying more in taxes, which will then trickle down to the consumers. But as far as how soon we can see this impacted in real time, the House is coming back at the end of the week, this Friday, to take a vote on that. The only thing that could really tie this up, which I highly doubt, is if there are progressives who are disappointed that the package isn't bigger, as well as if there's moderates who are a little bit uncomfortable with passing it. But so far, we haven't heard any of those House Democrats speak out against this. So, and especially considering how quickly leadership moved it through the Senate, we can expect to see a similar situation in the House. This is definitely a top priority for Democrats. So after it passes the House, it's off to the White House, and then President Biden will sign it.
Great insights as always, Melina Weisskopf. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Have a good day.
Thank you. You too.
And as Melina just mentioned, Republicans obviously had some issues with the bill, and part of their criticism is also that it may do the opposite and make inflation possibly worse. Now, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy shared his thoughts on Twitter, and this is what he said. Senate Democrats just voted to raise your taxes and hire an army of IRS agents to spy on your bank accounts to make sure you pay up.
And in other news, police in Albuquerque, New Mexico are investigating a murder Friday night to see if it's connected to other recent killings. The men were all Muslim. 2 of them attended the same mosque. NTD's Jeremy Sandberg tells us more about the ongoing investigation.
Authorities are on the lookout for a gray Volkswagen Jetta or Passat with tinted windows. They believe it may be connected to the murder of 4 Muslim men in Albuquerque.
We have a very, very strong lead. We have a vehicle of interest, and we want everyone to take note of this vehicle who lives in central New Mexico, and we have got to find this vehicle.
A man was found dead in a parking lot from a gunshot wound on Friday. His name has not yet been released. 2 Muslim men who both attended the same mosque were gunned down in the past 2 weeks. Authorities determined Thursday there is a connection between the 2 killings. Police say in the previous 3 murders, the men were ambushed and shot without warning.
We will bring this person or these persons to justice. We will provide justice to the families who have lost everything.
It's now suspected the recent murders are connected to the killing of an Afghan immigrant in November last year. The local Crime Stoppers Board is offering a $20,000 reward for information that helps lead to an arrest. Several agencies are probing the murders, including the New Mexico State Police, the FBI, and the U.S. Marshals Service. Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News.
Authorities say they're not labeling the murders hate crimes until a clear motive is established. They have not said why they believe the killings are linked or if there are any witnesses. Authorities are now asking anyone with information to come forward.
And in other crime-related news, New York City's police department is asking for the public's help to solve a brazen $2 million jewelry robbery that happened Friday. Security cameras captured the heist, during which 4 men did a targeted smash and grab at Rocco's Jewelry in the Bronx. In less than 30 seconds, the video shows the men using a hammer to break open display cases and to steal high-end diamonds. They made it out with an estimate of $2.15 million worth of jewelry. The thieves got away on foot. A reward is now being offered. Anyone with information is encouraged to call Crime Stoppers at 1-800-577-TIPS.
And in travel news, some passengers traveling by air in the U.S. had a frustrating weekend. Over 1,600 flights were canceled and around 15,000 delayed. That's according to the flight tracking site FlightAware. There were nearly 660 cancellations within, into, or out of the United States on Saturday. There were over 940 flights canceled on Sunday. Chicago O'Hare had the most cancellations and delays on Sunday, with around 12% of flights canceled and over 40% of flights delayed. The Transportation Department is now proposing rules that will require airlines to give passengers a refund if their flight schedule is changed by 3 hours or more for domestic flights and 6 hours for international flights. The rules would also cover passengers if airlines change their arrival or departure airports. And Indiana's Republican Governor Eric Holcomb signed into law a bill that bans most abortions 6 weeks after the U.S. Supreme Court's decision to reverse Roe v. Wade.
In a Friday statement, Holcomb said, quote, "Following the overturning of Roe, I stated clearly that I would be willing to support legislation that made progress in protecting life." SB 1 was passed by the Republican-controlled Senate in a vote of 28-19 on Friday evening as abortion rights demonstrators protested outside the Senate chambers. Some held signs that read, "My body, my choice," and "SB 1 is a death sentence." The legislation bans abortions altogether, with exceptions allowed in cases of fetal abnormalities considered lethal or to prevent serious physical health risks to the mother. Exceptions are also permitted for underage victims of rape or incest, but only up to 10 weeks of pregnancy. West Virginia is likely days away from passing a near-total abortion ban, and some 10 other Republican-led states have already implemented similarly strict measures.
And in the Middle East, a ceasefire between Israel and Palestinian militants took effect yesterday evening. It comes in a bid to end nearly 3 days of violence. It's the worst fighting between Israel and Gaza militant groups since Israel and Hamas fought an 11-day war last year. NTD's Condemn has more.
The ceasefire took effect at 11:30 p.m. local time. Israeli strikes and militant rockets continued in the minutes leading up to the beginning of the truce. Israel says it will respond strongly if the ceasefire is violated. Israeli aircraft had pummeled targets in Gaza since Friday, while the Iran-backed Palestinian Jihad militant group fired hundreds of rockets at Israel in response. Over 40 Palestinians were killed over 3 days, including 15 children and 4 women. Several hundred were injured. Israel says some of the dead were killed by misfired rockets. Iron Dome defense systems intercepted incoming rockets from the Gaza Strip over the city of Sderot in southern Israel on Sunday. Israel launched its operation with a strike Friday on a leader of the Islamic Jihad. Another attack followed on Saturday with a targeted strike on a second prominent leader. The second Islamic Jihad commander was killed in an airstrike on an apartment building in the Rafah refugee camp late Saturday. 2 other militants and 5 civilians were also killed. The Rafah strike was the deadliest so far in the current round of fighting. Costamenes, NTD News.
And we're turning our attention to Cuba for a moment. Cuban firefighters battle for a second day to control a blaze at a large oil tank farm in the western province of Matanzas. The body of one firefighter was discovered after a group of 17 firefighters went missing. Over 100 people were injured, 5 are in critical condition. Mexico and Venezuela sent special teams to join the Cuban firefighters Sunday. The fire began Friday night when lightning struck a storage tank during a thunderstorm. The flames spread to a second tank the next day, triggering a series of explosions. Officials say conditions are still too dangerous to search for missing firefighters. Nearly 5,000 people have been evacuated. The facility's 8 huge storage tanks hold oil used to fuel electricity generation. The disaster comes as Cuba is already struggling to deal with severe economic and energy crises, causing frequent power blackouts. It is unknown how much fuel had been lost to the flames. And Cuba's President Miguel Díaz-Canel told Cuban media he appreciates the help from Mexico and Venezuela since Cuba doesn't have any experience or resources for dealing with fires of such magnitude. The president also met with the families of the missing firemen.
And now to South America, Colombia swore in its first leftist president yesterday. Gustavo Petro pledged to fight inequality and mark a turning point in the history of a country which has long been plagued by conflict between the government and guerrilla groups. He gave his first speech as president standing next to the sword of Simón Bolívar. Petro is a former member of Colombia's M19 guerrilla group. He won the presidential election in June. 8 heads of state attended Petro's inauguration. The incoming president says Colombia will stop granting new licenses for oil exploration and will ban fracking projects. That's despite the oil industry making almost half of the nation's legal exports. He plans to implement a tax change that boosts taxes on the rich and do away with corporate tax breaks. And coming up, China says it will extend its threatening military exercises around Taiwan for a month. That's in response to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit last week. And what covers 8,000 miles, stops in 20 states across the U.S., and collects signatures to end the Chinese Communist Party. The CCP Tour, of course, and that and more after the break.
That was a shooting gallery up there.
I could hear the tremble in his voice.
She suffered a fairly severe beating. The video is pretty graphic.
Justice for us seems almost impossible.
It's not fun to watch somebody die, and They knew she was in mortal peril.
They have not asked the hard questions. Why was the Capitol intentionally unsecure that day?
The FBI had information about security concerns before January 6th.
They're out for blood, and they're getting it. They appear to be winning.
Were the actions of the Capitol Police out of line? Were there violations in use of force?
Now I describe it as an inside job.
I'm ready to do whatever God calls me.
Good to have you back. China says it will extend its threatening military drills in the waters of Taiwan for the next month. This comes just a day after the scheduled end of its largest ever exercises following House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit. Taiwan's defense ministry said Sunday it detected a total of 66 aircraft and 14 warships conducting naval and air exercises. The U.S. calls the move irresponsible. And in other news, the Republican National Committee has come forward in support of Taiwan with a unanimous resolution. The resolution calls for the U.S. to recognize Taiwan's right to exist. It states Taiwan is preparing for a potential Chinese invasion and that the U.S. should keep its commitment to provide defense equipment. The resolution demands clarity from the Biden administration, calling its Taiwan policy inconsistent and ambiguous.
And on the topic of China, the cross-country and CCP Tour reached Seattle last week. The tour covers 8,000 miles, making stops in 20 states across the U.S. Talking to people across the nation, participants are collecting petition signatures to end the Chinese Communist Party. NTD's Jeremy Sandberg reports.
A motorcade set out from New York cross-country to raise awareness and gain support, exposing an ongoing persecution in China, shining a light on the evils of communism and the crimes committed by the Chinese communist regime.
I think it's cool to see a group of Chinese say end CCP because I love freedom and I think all people should be free.
Many of the participants practice Falun Gong, also known as Falun Dafa, a spiritual discipline banned and heavily persecuted in mainland China. The convoy visited Yellowstone National Park, Mount Rushmore, and the Space Needle, among other tourist sites. In Seattle, political refugees that escaped communism showed their support for the cause.
Hey, you guys gonna win. You're gonna win full. It's gonna be like in Solidarity 89. Boom! Look at that. You see how Soviet, after the Solidarity movement, the Soviets collapsed. Everything collapsed suddenly. And that's what it is. Because what they build, the lies, is like a bad house of cards. When the truth hits it, it's gonna disappear.
They stressed the importance of exposing communism.
To educate people about the evil, and that's what it's all about, you know. As long as we don't want to repeat the same mistake in the future, we really need to know our past, and that's what I think you guys doing, you know.
Sometimes I hear people here in the US that are for communism be like, oh, well, they just did it wrong, but it's a good idea. And I think that it's really important to underline how no, it's not. And the reason why it's so terrible is because of what communism is and what it stands for.
Some offered words of encouragement and advice.
So the silent people will support you. Don't write them off. Don't write them off. Be with them, teach them, and they're gonna come up.
By actually changing people's thoughts and hearts and understanding, that's where you're gonna see real change.
And others expressed gratitude to the convoy for addressing the topic.
Sometimes you just have to bring the truth out. And you know, being American, having the freedom that we have here, I wish that would happen all over the world. There's a lot of suppression. People cannot talk about what they really believe. And I think they should have freedom of speech.
The tour collected thousands of signatures in its movement to end the CCP. Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News.
The NCCP Tour is now heading southwest on their way back to New York.
And on Saturday, Twitter's former CEO Jack Dorsey sent out a tweet with the words, "End the CCP." He was responding to a CNN reporter in Beijing. The report highlighted the toll of China's strict zero-COVID policies over the course of 2.5 years since the pandemic began. Over 14,000 people shared his 3-word message on Twitter.
And coming up, New Orleans college students are reimagining recycling, tackling 2 local environmental issues while creating jobs in the community.
Hi, I'm Smokey Bear, and I made an assistant to help you out, because only you can prevent wildfires.
Hey, Assistant Smokey Bear, call me Papa Bear, because I'm grilling up dinner. Do you get it?
Yes, good job.
So, what should I do with all these coals?
Don't just toss them out. Put them in a metal container because those embers can start a wildfire.
I understand. The stakes are high.
Ha 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 ha.
See, Smokey thinks I'm funny.
At The Nation Speaks, we don't just scratch the surface. We want to go wide and deep. Our viewers come away with a much richer understanding of the issues of the day. We really make a big effort to bring on different voices onto the show. We don't just talk to experts and newsmakers, which of course are extremely important, but we also want to hear from the American people. So the people who are impacted by the policies and issues that we're talking about, because what they have to say is just as important to the national conversation.
Welcome back. Residents of New Orleans may have been wondering why there was no glass recycling in their area. A couple of college students were thinking the same thing, so they decided to take action.
It all started with a bottle of wine.
We sort of just cracked this idea to do something about it and try to solve that issue, however small that something might be. And that's when we decided to start Glass Half Full.
This is Francisca and Max from Tulane University, 24 years old and the co-founders of this recycling company, Glass Half Full.
We started in that backyard, then we moved into a very small warehouse, and then we finally moved into the 40,000 square foot facility that we're currently in. So we just kind of took it small step by small step until we finally got to where we are today.
Let's do it! 2 years in, Glass Half Full would become the first glass recycling center in the city of New Orleans that collects, sorts, scoops, shatters, and recycles by turning that glass into sand.
Here in New Orleans, we're below sea level, so anytime there's a heavy rain, a storm, the city floods, essentially. And so sandbags are a really important line of defense for the folks in this city to protect their homes and businesses. So instead of using sand dredged from the Mississippi, they can use recycled glass sand. So the finest sand is really good for sandbags for disaster relief. The coarse sand is what we're using for coastal restoration projects. And then the gravel can be used for gravel. So in landscaping, water management, flooring, things like that.
The Trailblazer and her team have so far recycled almost 2 million pounds of glass.
I think the main reason we were able to jump into action so quickly was really because of how naive we were. We didn't have any recycling or waste management experience, and instead of sort of focusing on the negatives and what we didn't know, we focused on what we wanted to do and just sort of started and did it and learned along the way.
But not without sacrifice.
We had our college friends like, hey, instead of going out and partying on Saturday, what if you came and recycled glass with us?
And the community got right behind them. $150,000 in crowdfunding led them to the 40,000 square foot facility that they're currently in today with 10 employees.
It makes me feel amazing. Getting out there and like getting my hands dirty and really doing the work makes me feel so much more passionate and positive about, the outlook and what our future holds.
So maybe all we really need is a glass half full attitude to get our plans started and then watch them grow.
You know, Evelyn, that story really goes to show that we don't need to know it all to turn a good idea into reality.
I absolutely agree, and you got to start somewhere, right?
Yeah. Well, onto the Cincinnati Zoo, where a newborn baby hippo needs a name, and the zoo is asking for the public to help. Bibi the hippo gave birth Wednesday night. The new calf will stay off exhibit for a few weeks, allowing it to bond with its mother. Bibi's previous calf is Fiona, who was born premature, weighing just 29 pounds, which is very small for a hippo. Fiona is now happy and healthy and weighs about 1,300 pounds. The public is encouraged to send name ideas for Fiona's little sister through the Cincinnati Zoo's website. Okay, here it goes. How would you name the zoo? Or how would you name the hippo?
The zoo. Good question. How about Todd?
That's so creative.
Thanks. I'm honestly just not that good with names. I already know I'm not going to be much help on this topic, so let's just move on to a different video that you just have to see. Dozens of dogs gathered on Pacifica State Beach in California on Saturday for the World Dog Surfing Championships. Dogs competed in categories according to size in small, medium, large, and very large groups. The canines also competed in tandem dogs as well as tandem human dogs with their owners on board. Dogs are judged on multiple factors, including the length of the ride, technique, standing on all fours versus sitting versus laying down, confidence, and size or strength of the wave. Do you think the doggies are enjoying it, or does it make them nervous?
Well, I don't know. Surfing's really hard. It requires a lot of balance, and I guess it helps them cool down. I'm sure they enjoy it.
Cool. That's all for today's program. Thanks for watching. I'm Evelyn Lee.
And I'm Kevin Hogan.
Thanks for watching us on YouTube. Did you know YouTube only keeps selective videos on its platform? So if you want to make sure you get the full picture, just subscribe to our newsletter. Go to newsletter.ntd.com and sign up. It's free.